Where'd you find this?
1.5 video. Our objectives here are to identify and use special pairs of angles and identify perpendicular lines. So we're going to be determining relationships between angles and solving problems using those relationships. We first need to know some vocab terminology, so we'll start with complementary angles. Complementary angles are just two angles with a sum of 90. So they add together to make a 90-degree angle. They can also be separated and still add to 90. They do not have to be next to each other or sharing a side like that. We also have supplementary angles, which is very similar. That is two angles with a sum of 180 degrees. Sometimes you'll see them sharing a side along a straight line. Sometimes they could also be separate angles like this as well, but 90 plus 90 would equal 180. Adjacent angles are just angles that are next to each other. They share a vertex and a side. So any pair of angles that are next to each other are adjacent. It doesn't mean that they have any other relationship, however. A linear pair, that is two adjacent angles that make a line. So a linear pair is like in this example here, two angles share a side, they make a straight line. They're also supplementary. These two angles are going to add up to 180 because they're on a straight line together. Vertical angles are two non-adjacent angles formed by intersecting lines. So what does that mean? That means it's two angles that are across an intersection from each other, like angles 1 and 3. Perpendicular lines are just lines that intersect to make right angles. So anytime you see this little box there, you've got perpendicular lines. This symbol right here means that these two lines are perpendicular to each other. So it looks like an upside down capital T. That means that these two lines are perpendicular. So first thing you're going to be doing with this is looking at an image and just figuring out what is the relationship between a couple of angles. So when I look at angles 1 and 2, they're next to each other, but they're not on a straight line. There's not a right angle mark here. So these are just adjacent angles. They're just sharing that side. Angles 1 and 6, however, form a straight line across. So that means they're not only are they adjacent, not only do they share that side, but they're also a linear pair. Okay, there it is. They're also a linear pair. Now the next one's angles 1 and 5. When I look here, angle 1, angle 5, they're directly across an intersection from each other. So that's what makes them vertical angles. Angles 2 and 3, if you notice, they're just next to each other. There's nothing else there that helps us out. I'm going to ask you to try the examples in number 2. And then I'll switch to example 3. So example 3, you're going to find that these types of problems are very similar to what we did in the last section. It says find x so that ZD is perpendicular to ray ZP. So that means that there's a right angle here. If there's a right angle here, that means that these two angles must be complementary or add to 90. So this is just another part plus part equals whole amount problem. It's the same thing. We just need to know that this symbol tells us that the total angle size is 90. Solve that and you end up with 7 for x. And notice it doesn't ask you to find anything else. Then I'll ask you to try examples 4 and 5 in class tomorrow.